Hi everyone, Frank from Guten here. We've got people coming in now, so we're just going to give it a couple more minutes so that we can get as many in as possible from the start. All right, I think we're about ready to get started. So thank you all for joining us today. Everything you wanted to know about paid advertising. Very excited. Our last webinar, we sent out a survey to participants about what their biggest concerns about running an online store in the Shopify store, and by far it was questions about paid advertising and running promotional campaigns. So very excited about the panelists we were able to get for this. Todd Bars, who did our last webinar for us, Guten's president of e-commerce and retail operations, is going to be the moderator today. He'll be speaking with Chris Kidwell from Clixo Search. Chris, I've had many great conversations with him about paid advertising. He's been doing online marketing since 2001, back in the old days of online marketing, as it were. We've also got Cesar Barba from Inflow. Cesar's been coordinating pay-per-click media strategies using Google, Bing, Yahoo, and Facebook for years now. And we've also got Nicki Martinez from Milestone Internet from us today. She has 40 years of digital media experience. She's worked in a variety of industries, including hospitality, retail, real estate, SaaS, local businesses. So we've got a very well-rounded panel for today's discussion, and very happy that you joined us today. And with that, I'll go ahead and introduce Todd, and he can take it from here.
Great, thanks, Frank. Frank, let's go ahead and show the second slide that we have. I want to make sure that our panelists are recognized for the time that they're giving us and the fantastic information that we're all about to learn. So I've known Chris and Cesar for a number of years. We've worked together in different capacities. Nicki is fairly new to me, but she comes highly recommended from our CMO here at Guten. And we have a fantastic panel to let us learn about the increasing complex world of paid advertising. Let me start out by, the way we're going to do this is I'm going to start by asking just a general question to kind of get everybody on the same page, and then I'll let each of the panelists respond to the question, and hopefully we can let the dialogue go from there. I'd like everyone on the call, if you have specific questions that you'd like answered, please put them into the question modal that's part of the GoToWebinar, and I'll definitely be sure to grab those questions and make sure that we work them into the discussion as we progress through the webinar. So With that, thank you again, everyone, for attending. Let me go ahead and start out. So the paid advertising space is extremely complex, and it's only gotten more complicated over the years, and it's also become extremely competitive, which makes making mistakes with your limited budget can be very costly. So why don't I start out, and Chris, I'll start with you. Maybe you could answer this, and then we'll let everyone get around in terms of answers. How do you view, or how do you think e-commerce store owners should view paid advertising as kind of a larger part of their marketing budget, especially if they're getting into just starting to get into the paid market?
Yeah, so paid advertising is definitely becoming more and more complex and definitely competitive. I feel like in this day and age, it is a very important place for people who have a business goal to consider advertising. Mainly because, with the different paid advertising channels that are available, you have the ability to reach a very large audience and be competitive against bigger and larger players that you normally wouldn't have the opportunity to compete against. And you have many different tactics that you can leverage to reach your audience in a bunch of very creative ways. So, for me, I think, and not just because that's what I do, but I strongly believe that a good paid online advertising strategy can go a long way and fit into many different types of marketing strategy.
Cool, excellent. Caesar, what are your thoughts on how paid advertising fits into the overall marketing plan and marketing budget?
Sure. First of all, thanks for setting this up and having us, Todd. It's a pleasure to join you on this call. As far as where a paid strategy would fit in, I think it really just depends on the specific business, and understanding what kind of goals, what kind of outcome you're hoping to get out of paid advertising. Because like Chris said, there's a number of different platforms and tactics you can use. But it's almost more important just to understand what you're trying to get out of those tactics. So I would say, depending on the product, there's a number of different research tools you can use to kind of understand what strategy or what type of campaign would be more effective. And then from there, it's really more about kind of having a clear benchmark that you're trying to hit. Having clear intention and a very targeted approach to getting to that goal, and then seeing which platforms and campaigns are best suited for that. So I think it's as complex as it's getting. There's a lot of tools out there to help you make really strategic, really smart decisions to reach the audience you're trying to get in front of.
Fantastic, thank you. Nicki, how about you? What are your thoughts on how paid advertising fits into the overall marketing plan and marketing budget?
Well, I think that Chris and Caesar stole a lot of words out of my mouth. They definitely summed up how it plays in strategic overall, right? But the one thing I would add, especially in the retail world, is that channels are getting cheaper. So while the cost per click of Facebook might be going up, as an example, the channels of acquisition of new customer is actually easier for retailers than, say, it was 10 years ago. So I think as these channels start to develop, there's a lot more opportunity to gain more customers and brand awareness than there has been in the past, which is the exciting part of it all.
Cool. Yeah, this is great. So Nicki, let me change questions. I'm going to let you answer something first. So you guys all pointed out that it's all a matter of how your business is oriented and what goals that you're trying to achieve. So knowing that the majority of our audience here has an e-commerce website or potentially multiple sites that they're in charge of, Nicki, maybe you could start with what types of metrics would you advise people who are starting out to monitor as part of their paid ad efforts? And then, how does that move into the overall monitoring of their site? I mean, we have attribution models and all kinds of things in Google Analytics. There's an unlimited set of tools out there for us to help our paid advertising efforts. What types of metrics do you typically monitor and make sure that the clients are aware of, so that they're getting the biggest bang for their buck?
Sure. So I think it goes back to goals. As far as metrics go, it depends on what kind of audience you're trying to target. If you are trying to build brand awareness, then your metrics are going to be different than the bottom of the funnel. But to your point about attribution, at this point, I think obviously revenue and conversions are the bottom line. So if you're working, for example, on a brand awareness campaign and you're looking at click-through rates and engagement, is that customer coming back around in the end of the day, which you can see through attribution? But I think for the most part, you obviously, when you're talking about AdWords, for example, you want to be looking at traffic and the relevancy beyond revenue. And then from a Facebook standpoint or any sort of paid social, you want to be looking at engagement in addition to revenue. I think those are like the basics, at least.
Cool. Caesar, what are your thoughts on metrics?
I think it's similar to the previous question. Based on the goals, you have to have something to measure against that. So certainly spend and revenue are key metrics there, assuming the intended goal is just direct purchases. In addition to that, some other KPIs you want to keep a pulse on are margins. You obviously don't want to be you obviously want to be revenue over cost, but if your margins are just too thin, then it could end up not being profitable as well. Lifetime value can be an important one to keep track of as well, if that's something that's known. Obviously a little tougher for newer businesses. And then everyone was mentioning assisted conversions. That's certainly another area where you want to keep track of too. There's no one KPI that tells you whether or not things are successful, but if you can look at kind of the whole ecosystem of how your campaign's influencing your audience, that can really give you a good idea for if you're getting the results you need.
Great. Chris, your thoughts?
Yeah, so for me, I mean, I want to, echo what Nicki and Cesar have said, and I may go, I may also add that, revenue is what most people are interested in. If you're selling something online through a store, the ultimate goal is to drive up your revenue. So revenue is very important, and being able to track that revenue, in a way that you're confident in, and being able to tie that revenue to other key performance indicators like sales or conversions. And so those are very important when creating your strategy, because at the end of the day, most strategies are designed to increase your revenue or return on ad spend. But I think sometimes people overlook all of the other key performance indicators that may ultimately contribute to that macro conversion action of a sale or generation of revenue. And so when coming up with an approach to tracking, I think make sure 100% that you are tracking revenue and conversions to the best of your ability in a way that you have a high level of confidence. And then from there, also put together all the other metrics that you believe are contributing to ultimately getting sales. So it could be things like impressions or reach, clicks, or certain types of engagement, like views of a certain page on your website. But making sure that you have multiple key performance indicators along the way on that path to conversion will give you, opportunities to take different strategic approaches to how you spend your advertising budget. Yeah, I think that would be my.
Great,
my thoughts.
great. Yeah. So I think as a e-commerce store owner myself, both present and past through a number of different industries, I agree. The micro conversion actions are huge in terms of looking at ad engagement all the way through to the end sale. I think the biggest thing that I've seen in the past is return on ad spend. And Caesar and Chris and I have definitely had discussions about this over the years in terms of what you spend on your ad. Return on ad spend is not always directly correlated to what a profitable venture is. And when I'm looking at metrics, I'm always looking at both return on ad spend from a revenue perspective as well as return on ad spend from a margin perspective, because you can look at it on the margin side. If you look at, that's basically what I'm going to call straight math. You would look at that and say, well, for every dollar I spend, am I bringing back $2? Because I need to pay for the dollar that I spent, and then I need another dollar in revenue. And then let's say I have 30% margin on that extra dollar. Okay, well, for every dollar that I spent, then I'm actually putting 30 cents into my bank account. And that's a really important metric to monitor. On the other hand, though, you need to monitor on a revenue side as well, because not every paid search effort is going to, or paid advertising effort is going to yield a positive net return. And so you need to look at it as, you're acquiring customers who may come back multiple times, and they may actually end up converting in other channels. And so that's why I mentioned earlier the attribution modeling. I'm kind of curious. I want to switch topics here from metrics and take a step back and ask you guys about what your thoughts are on the various ad platforms that are out there. So most everybody knows about AdWords and Bing. Facebook is usually a top priority for people. I'm kind of curious what your strategies are and recommendations between AdWords, Facebook, Bing, Instagram, LinkedIn, Pinterest. Hoping you guys could give a little bit of insight on your thoughts on those platforms, and who might want to use them first or last, depending on their target markets and things like that. So, Nicki, I'll let you start. Any thoughts on the ad platforms and how to get started, and where the best place is to dip your toe in the water if you're first getting involved in this?
I mean, I think, I think Facebook is definitely the most intuitive for setting up your first campaign. I think Amazon has a pretty rudimentary platform that's also easy to set up automatic targeting. I think the biggest piece of any platform is, pushing yourself to learn the best practices and the optimizations. And then, of course, as you spoke about before, the ROI of those platforms. But as far as technically speaking, I would say that Amazon is easy to get started with a pay-per-click campaign, and Facebook is easy to get started with a more creative base.
Great. Caesar, your thoughts?
We tend to, specifically for our e-commerce clients, we tend to really start with shopping campaigns on AdWords, and search campaigns is more of a quick, low-hanging fruit to get the most bang for your buck. We also tend to always recommend a brand search campaign in AdWords. Just, if you're not bidding on your brand, chances are someone else is. So it's those we tend to see as the more kind of best return on your investment. And then from there, we kind of would recommend scaling what you've found successful in AdWords to Bing, and then from there go into the social platforms. But that could definitely change depending on, if you already have a strong social presence, if that's where your audience is going, that might shift our recommendation. But typically we see pretty good returns from shopping campaigns.
Great. Chris?
Yeah, for me, I like to take a bit of a ground up approach, in the sense that, for the very first thing, when considering which platform to advertise on, I would say start with your goals. And depending on your goal or what you're trying to accomplish, the different ad platforms, give you some different tools and tactics. if you're trying to sell something specific that has a high level of interest, I think AdWords probably gives you the easiest path to reaching a qualified audience, because what you're doing in AdWords search specifically is you're targeting people based on their intent, because they are literally typing into a search query box what they're interested in. And if you sell or you have content that is what that user is looking for, then it's real easy to make a contextual match between what a user is searching for and what you offer. So being able to target users based on intent, for me, in my experience, is probably one of the easiest and most successful ways to target users. And it's one of the easiest to get into based on what you need to have to advertise there. All you need to advertise on AdWords is a credit card and the ability to think critically about what users might want from your site, and be able to write ads that deliver upon that offer. So some of the other advertising platforms, that we typically talk about, Facebook being, Instagram advertising through Facebook, advertising on LinkedIn, all of those have more requirements in terms of the ad assets you need in order to get those set up. So what I would consider is, first, what are your goals? What are you trying to accomplish? And what assets do you have? Do you have a list of customers? Do you have image assets? Do you have a designer on hand? And then, depending on those two answers, it might direct me towards a platform. But generally, I would echo Caesar and say that starting with AdWords search will be a strong foundation for anybody.
Great. Yeah, totally agree on that. It definitely stems from, going back, what are your goals? In the end, obviously, the common goal is sales, but knowing that everyone has slightly different purchase paths based on their business, or your customers have different purchase paths, it's really important to understand that, I think, and how you approach the paid advertising space. I want to switch topics again. So we have a question from one of our listeners. Is there a good attribution platform or service that you can recommend that's affordable? Or will Google Analytics do that for us? Let me start the conversation here, and then I'll pass it over to Nicki. So Google Analytics, as a store owner myself, Google Analytics is my go-to in terms of monitoring the overall efforts of any paid, really any marketing effort in general, but certainly paid. That said, there's certainly metrics that Google Analytics is not going to give us that are really important for managing your paid efforts. The thing about Google Analytics, you've heard me mention it once before, is the attribution modeling. And I think that's really important because, again, you can be very myopic about the spend and say, well, I'm spending $1, but I'm only seeing, 75 cents in revenue come back. And so that begs the question, like, well, are you losing your tracking somewhere? Are people coming in on one device and coming back on another? So your paid efforts are doing really well on mobile, let's say, but in the end, they're coming back and transacting on a desktop. And if you don't have any form of cross-device tracking or things like that set up, you can certainly lose out. And so I think it's important to understand that your tracking is in place first. So Google Analytics is certainly my go-to. But I'm curious what the three of you guys use to monitor on top of Google Analytics, and if there's any other tools that you use, and even just talking about the dashboards and tools that are available in the platforms themselves, that'd probably be a good place to start. So, Nicki, I'll let you go ahead and take the first crack at this one.
Yeah, as far as attribution goes, for the most part, we use Google Analytics. I would say with a small business, especially if you haven't found the limits of Google Analytics, there's a lot that it offers there, and I think it's worth focusing on that. I think a big problem is when people start to spread out their tracking between a lot of different third parties or platforms, the black box becomes bigger, and so Google Analytics offers sort of a central place to look at everything for free. So I think definitely starting there when you do have a lower budget is the best recommendation.
Great. Caesar, your thoughts?
I'm also a big fan of Google Analytics. For how much it costs, nothing. It's a great start from diagnosing simple attribution questions you may have to really complex ones. We had one. So the reports we tend to look at for attribution would be the path length reports. That gives you a good idea for what are the different touch points. Like if someone's going from organic to paid to direct to an email campaign, you see all the paths that then lead to either your transaction goal or your micro conversion goals. And then there's also just different attribution models within the conversion report in Google Analytics that let you just do quick cuts on all your data for looking at first touch to last touch to linear. And just to give you a little context there, first touch would just give all the credit of a transaction, all the revenue to the first touch point in a conversion path, whereas last touch would be the last. Linear would spread it equally. And it really, I think this goes back to a lot of what we've been discussing as far as both understanding, your business model, your customer life cycle, as well as, the different marketing efforts you have in play. So for instance, one example where we used the attribution model to quickly diagnose an issue recently was we saw a year-over-year decrease in PPC performance that kind of just came out of nowhere. The client did just launch a new site. So for a little bit, we were kind of attributing it to that, to change. The conversion rates in general across all sources were low. But then we noticed this new source just suddenly get introduced and account for a good amount of transaction revenue for that specific account. When we looked at the path length report, we saw that new source was 90% of the time coming either after organic or PPC, and we're able to kind of figure out where that came from, and that was mainly just as the new site was launched, there was a new app or new plugin that was kind of an exit offer that took over the source of your campaign. So that's just kind of one instance where we use attribution model and what reports we use to kind of figure out what's going on.
Great. Yeah, totally agree with that. I'll just point out releasing a new website it's a scary thing, both from a conversion perspective and certainly from any paid effort. So I think that's important to note that you need to isolate variables as things happen in your business and as your business grows, and that a lot of things can change either by your own account or certainly by Google or Facebook or whatever ad platform you're talking about, and that can drastically change the metrics. So I think it's important that having a holistic view of your metrics is really important, and it's not easy. This stuff, by the way, just so everyone is aware, like Google, Facebook, and everybody else out there would like you to think that it's really easy to get started on this stuff. And as great a platforms as they are, as we mentioned earlier, this stuff is really complicated. There's a reason why these three people who are on the call with us are experts in their field, and they've spent years, if not decades, working with these platforms and growing with them. So don't be disenchanted by the complexity if you're first getting into this, because I think it's very overwhelming, to get involved with paid ads at this stage of the game. So that's why there are people like those that we have on the call here who are making a living doing this. So Chris, let me let you chime in as well on this question. Any thoughts on platforms and tracking and other tools that you use to monitor campaigns?
Sure. I'm a huge advocate of simplifying and reducing complexity whenever possible. And usually when people are starting out, the technology requirements are very low, in the sense that you can usually get away with a free version of Google Analytics to give you as much tracking as you would probably need to start out. And so, for me, I typically don't recommend adding new technologies until you absolutely have to. And Google Analytics, from an attribution standpoint, does a really good job of post-click attribution, about as good a job as any. They do not do a very good job of pre-click attribution, but most people, aren't going to be as concerned with that in the beginning, and you'd probably want to just table that idea for a while. So for post-click attribution, Google Analytics is my go-to, and the only other one that I would say, or the only other thing that I would recommend doing is if you plan on advertising through a platform like AdWords or Facebook, make sure that you implement, if at all possible, the tracking technologies that platform uses. So for AdWords, you can implement conversion tracking. You can implement a remarketing tag. For Facebook, a pixel. And if you use the pixel technologies from the different advertising platforms, it will give you, for that platform, generally a little more robust pre-click attribution. For example, with AdWords, if you have your conversion tracking installed and you have your attribution modeling set up correctly, you can start to see different things like cross-device modeling and stuff like that. And you can also rely on the machine learning from systems like AdWords that are very sophisticated to help you understand how people are interacting with your ads throughout the life cycle before they actually click and take any action. Great. Google Analytics, number one, I would say, for attribution at a basic level, and then making sure that you implement, where possible, things like conversion tracking and AdWords if you're going to use that, or the Facebook pixel if you're going to use that.
Awesome. Do you guys do you recommend using Google Tag Manager versus manually tagging things, and what types of advantages or disadvantages do you see with the Google Tag Manager system? I mean, it can do a lot of stuff. Some people on this call may not even be familiar with that. Basically, the gist of it is, Google Tag Manager is a container that allows you to put all these tracking scripts that our three participants have talked about, and you kind of put it all in one place. And then there's lots of advanced things you can do within. Any thoughts, guys, on the use of Tag Manager and helping you do tracking, and whether it's beneficial or not, especially for beginning store owners versus all the way up to people who are running very complex campaigns? Chris, you want to take the first crack at that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think if you're just starting out, I would say that don't implement Tag Manager unless there's an actual business case to do so. And the types of things that you would find yourself needing Tag Manager for in the beginning is, one, if you're not a developer and don't know anything about coding, but you want to start implementing things like Google Analytics, AdWords remarketing and tracking, Google Tag Manager would give you an easy way to do that, and you would only need to get a developer to set it up for you once. Tag Manager definitely allows you to solve some complex tracking issues, but I definitely, I think if I'm talking to somebody who's just starting out with this and is just starting to set stuff up, I would say reduce complexity and maybe leave Tag Manager until you actually have a requirement to use it, and just start with Google Analytics. And I think that would go a long way for people.
Great. Caesar and Nicki, your thoughts on this?
So I would say, sorry, go ahead, Caesar.
No, go for it, Nicki.
So one big thing that we love about Google Tag Manager and all our work is that it, adding even multiple tags can really increase or slow down the speed of your website, which obviously is critical in today's day and age. So that's one part that we love about Google Tag Manager. And then to your point, Chris, the lack of developers that you need to get things done. You can pretty much do everything on your own, and it's pretty intuitive. So I think, as Chris said, as soon as you need to append something to your website, a pixel, I would go ahead and get Tag Manager set up because it's pretty easy to use. And once you have it, you're pretty much set. So.
Great.
I tend to agree with both of those comments. We at our agency, we love using GTM. We do have someone on our team that has some coding and JavaScript background, so it really works in our favor. But I would also say, you know, similar to how anyone can start an AdWords campaign, you know, like Todd mentioned earlier, it's easy to start a campaign and spend money, but it's not necessarily easy to spend money in the right places. With GTM, if you don't know what you're doing, you could also end up messing up a lot of your data. So I would definitely say, you know, if you are starting to use GTM, when I was learning to use GTM, one of my favorite tools was just the what's it called? It's the preview mode, and just make sure the tags are firing exactly how you expect. You know, do some QAing on your own, but outside of that, there's a good number of resources to kind of put some guardrails around, you know, how you set up GTM and how you set up different tracking. But it can be really effective, and it's been really helpful in our case to, like Chris and Nicki said, not have to rely on a developer resource to implement tracking.
For sure. Caesar, do you have, or really any of you, do you guys have any specific resources in terms of blogs or places that you go to outside of the Google Tag Manager help to do this kind of stuff that you refer to? Or are there people out there that are really pushing the limits of this and have really great tutorials or anything that people can use to learn how to use Google Tag Manager? I'll let you start, Caesar. Go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, so there is one site that's really technical with it. I know our resource internally tends to use it as a reference. I think it's Simo Ahava, SIMOHAHAVA, just that name.com. Has some pretty useful from beginner to really advanced techniques. When I was learning to use it, I would typically just go to Google and ask whatever I was trying to accomplish. I would put that in the search, and typically I'd get something pretty helpful.
Cool. Chris or Nicki, any resources you guys typically go to outside of the standard GTM help menus?
So this is Chris. For me, I highly recommend Julius Federovicius of Analytics Mania for almost all of the new information I get about Google Tag Manager and Google Analytics tracking in particular. Analytics Mania has a lot of great articles, and the gentleman who writes all the articles, Julius Federovicius, he's amazing. And actually, for any Google Tag Manager implementation that happens for clients of Clixo, we hire him directly, and we tell our clients that this is who's going to be doing it. And he's a very inexpensive resource for setup of Google Tag Manager. If it requires a lot of complexity, he's amazing at it. And then just generally for information and ideas about how to use Google Tag Manager, Analytics Mania is the name of his blog.
Great. Nicki, any resources you use?
I would say, well, first of all, my company at Milestone, we have our own analytics team, and then for our larger accounts, as Chris said, it does cost, it is important that it's set up correctly. So we use a company called Delve Analytics, and they do an outstanding job at setting everything up correctly. The other big thing I would say is in more of the small budget clients, most of the platforms that you're using in this day and age have pretty good implementation guides and integration with Google Tag Manager themselves. So for example, if you were to set up your Facebook pixel, if you go into your business manager and you actually click through, it will automatically connect with your Google Tag Manager and help you implement from there. And a lot of platforms have that capability at this point. So while it's important if you're doing anything custom, the standard elements of setting up Google Tag Manager with other platforms are pretty straightforward in this day and age.
Great. Wonderful, guys. Thank you. I know we got somewhat technical about some pretty advanced tools. We have a ton of questions pouring in. I'm going to try to aggregate some of them so that we touch on the topics that are of interest here to our listeners. Let's switch gears a little bit and let's talk about working with agencies like yourselves. So as someone who's been both on the agency side as well as an operator, I have a much better understanding of how both sides work. But a lot of people don't, especially those that are store owners, and it can be a bit daunting to get started in this and make sure that your advertising spend is being used as best as possible, especially when it's small. So Chris, I'm going to start with you. What are your thoughts on how companies should think about agencies like yourselves and how to work, and can you talk about some of the different business models out there in the way that agencies charge fees versus advertising spend, and what your opinions are on what's better for different situations or not, and things like that. So people are really interested in learning how to engage with agencies like yours and understand how the business models work, and should they choose one over another, and that type of thing. So maybe you guys could weigh in on how best to work with agencies if you're getting started.
Sure. A couple, if you're just starting to talk to agencies and interview an agency, and try to find a good fit for somebody to manage your paid advertising, the first thing that you should probably look at is, what are they doing in terms of contracts and pricing? And so, if one of the things about paid online advertising is it does take testing, it does take, practice and execution in order to get it working well. And so there will be that component of time. But most companies that, do a good job, and, I don't want to say that. There are a lot of companies out there that do a great job, but I find that companies that don't try to wrap you into a year or a 6-month contract for basic paid search management, they are more incentivized to do a good job for you, and they're in the hot seat month over month. So I typically find, immediately a higher level of trust for companies who don't try to wrap you into a long program without any real good reason why. The other, in terms of how an agency might price, so they will either do something like a flat rate, so a flat rate to manage your account or whatever the scope of work you're paying them to manage, or they might do something like a percentage of your ad spend. So the benefits of percentage of ad spend can be in the fact that if you're spending very little, then your cost could be very little. But if you find great performance and want to scale up your advertising efforts, you're going to be paying more and more and more to the company to manage that, when all they really have to do is, continue to increase your spend on whatever channels are effective. So as an agency, I prefer the model of pricing things on scope of work rather than percentage of spend, because it gives me more opportunity to do what's right for the client, and it does not incentivize me to wastefully spend money. Some other things that you might run into out there are, people that will give you like a guarantee. So we guarantee to have a certain keyword in the #1 position for, a certain period of time at a specific cost. I would be very careful with those because typically what a company like that's going to do is they're going to let you pick 1 or 2 or 3 keywords, guarantee that you're in the top position, and you don't get a lot of flexibility in the types of targeting you use, what keywords you buy, etc. So I think those are the 3 main types. And in terms of working with an agency, I mean, I couldn't stress enough to go into the conversation with a real clear goal in mind, on specifically what you're trying to accomplish, and then weigh everything that the agency you're talking to says against that goal, and see if they are creative and intuitive and able to, on the fly, come up with a strategy that sounds like it's going to work to produce whatever result you're looking for.
Yeah, for sure. Wow, a lot of great things to point out here that Chris mentioned. So, and then Cesar and Nicki, I'll let you guys chime in as well. So a couple of things that I heard Chris say that I want to make sure our listeners are aware of. In terms of the advertising budget, again, be sure that you're thinking a little bit longer term in terms of the business model that you choose. Like Chris said, as you scale things, if you find success, it can be more expensive. That said, finding finding agencies that you feel like a trust factor with. You know, the three people that we have on the phone here today, like I said, I have longstanding histories with them, and really our whole company here at Guten has longstanding histories with them. And so, you know, finding people that you trust is really important. So, you know, don't forget to take into account the human factor here and who you're working with. The couple of things that Chris mentioned. So think about the timing as well. So Chris mentioned about long-term contracts. One of the things to think about with agencies as an e-commerce store owner is understanding their side of the business and how they operate. I've always been a huge advocate of agencies when it comes to paid advertising, because you as a store owner have a lot of other things to worry about. And the fact of the matter is that, again, these are very complex platforms. They're difficult to get involved in and do things really, really well. The people that we have on the phone, they manage multiple accounts every single day. They're always touching their clients' accounts on a daily basis. And so a lot of the learnings that they get on another client's account will transfer over to yours. And so they're seeing so many different things that exist on the platforms that they're able to transfer that knowledge very quickly. Whereas if you're trying to manage this yourself, or you even have someone that you just hired who's, say, you know, a beginner in this, or, you know, maybe in they're a senior manager level and they're managing paid search, they may be very good at it, but just be aware that they only have their little view of the world. And it's not so much that they're being myopic on purpose, it's just that agencies see so much by having different clients. So what they learn from a lead gen website, they can actually transfer over to an e-commerce website. And, you know, if there's a quick change in an algorithm or something, you know, as an example of Google, they can make those adaptations because they're going to see it on another client's site before they see it on yours, but then they know to make that change. So just want to point out a couple of things there. You know, in terms of the timing and locking in of contracts, you know, most agencies do want you to have at least some level of commitment. You can't just turn on and turn off paid search or paid advertising on and overnight and expect to see return on ad spend in the positive numbers. Usually, I think it's reasonable to say, you know, you need about a 30-day window to give things a chance. So if you don't have the budget to run, say, 3 months at a time and take, you know, the first month as a loss leader, you should consider maybe stepping away from paid until you have a bigger budget to work with and you can take that kind of loss. That said, though, I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, so I'll let Caesar and Nicki weigh in on some of the things that Chris and I have already talked about, and see if, you know, if you guys have any opposing views or certainly anything to add on top of the agency model. So Caesar, why don't you go ahead and give us your input on it?
Sure, yeah. I don't know that I have too much more to add from what Chris mentioned, but maybe going back to other topics we discussed earlier, as far as maybe helping suss out a good agency versus a bad agency. And at least in my experience, it's the more, you know, in the sales process that the agency is trying to get a better understanding of your business and make sure all, you know, the tracking is in place, and maybe reviewing historical performance to make sure you're getting the full picture, and you know, expectations are kind of clear, like based on X, Y, and Z, you know, this is our target goal. I think the more you get that, you at least see that you're trying to get that level of understanding, maybe even asking certain questions that you know, you didn't take into account when, you know, in your business model. That can be a little reassuring from what I've seen. But it is tough. There's a lot of different agencies with different processes out there. Some of them are templated and cookie cutter, and they work well within that vertical, but not necessarily other areas. The only other, I'd say, business model I've heard of, I haven't seen personally, but is a pay per performance model. And that, I could see that being really tricky, but the benefit would be, you know, if you're going to do a pay per performance, you really have to have alignment on goals and tracking and attribution. I'd say more than anything, it would be important to have those clear benchmarks before moving into any sort of agreement that's pay per performance based. But certainly a benefit of, you know, not necessarily the more I spend, the more I make, but the more I spend in the right places, the more I grow the account in the right areas and the right platforms. That's kind of a mutually beneficial.
Agreed 100%. You know, you pointed something out, Caesar, I think it's really important to reiterate. Engaging with an agency or you know, a handful of them as you're trying to figure out how to get involved in the paid world. You can learn a lot about your own business just by engaging with an agency. You know, one of the things when I was on the consulting side is, you know, basically consulting is about basically telling the customer, so that the e-commerce store owner, about their business and you know, basically distilling it down and helping them really understand it. So I think you're exactly right. Agencies that spend the time, and basically, you know, this is free, right? I mean, this is their part of their sales development process. Agencies that spend the time to dig into your analytics ahead of time, you know, they're going to ask you for Google Analytics access. They're going to ask you for access to your paid accounts if you already have them. And they're going to go into that data, and they're actually going to do analysis ahead of time. Those agencies that do that, I think generally speaking, you can be very, very comfortable with and know that they are forward thinking, they're transparent, and they really do have your best interest in mind in terms of, you know, doing the best job they can for you. And you know, those that you typically that are going to come in and say, well, let's talk about your business for 30 minutes, but you know, we're going to set something up and then we'll get into it. That's sort of putting the cart before the horse, because not all agencies are good for every client, right? There are certainly spending thresholds that agencies have in terms of advertising budgets. There are lots of other things to consider. So anyways, I'm being a little verbose because I think it's really important to touch on that point, Caesar, that you made, that good agencies will spend the time up front at no cost to you as a store owner or a potential client to make sure that it's the right fit for everybody, and that, you know, they really understand your business before they decide to engage with you, because they don't want to promise things that they can't deliver. So Nicki, I hope I haven't stole too much from you, but you know, there's some really great points being made. What are your thoughts on how to engage agencies and models you've seen that work well or don't, and things that people should think about, you know, as they start to, you know, look at agencies to manage the paid process?
Yeah, sure. So I think everything that is said to your point has been stupendous. I think the big thing that I don't see clients do enough that I think is really important is asking the tough questions before the contract is signed. So I think it's really an opportunity to truly interview the team you'll be working with, and in order to trust them and look at them as a business extension of yours, you have to ask the questions that you would ask if you were hiring them. One thing to always try to understand is the team that you'll be working with, what that looks like internally, how many accounts people are managing, the more, not the merrier, and how the teams work together. So a lot of agencies silo AdWords versus Facebook versus SEO, and understanding how those work together would be the best thing. How they prioritize what kind of tasks they'll be doing, your spend, etc. Just if you can't get as technical in questions, that's also another area of opportunity to ask them what kind of education they'll provide to you. The easiest clients are the smartest clients. So here at Milestone, we really work proactively to make sure that our clients are fully informed. But I know that that's not the case for every agency. So asking them what kind of resources they have for you to learn what they're doing. And then a big area is asking for references and talking to other companies that are using the agency. And then one other big piece when we talk about contracts, just make sure that you're owning your own data so that you're in charge of your Google Analytics, your AdWords. I've worked at agencies where that's not the case, and it's always a surprise to clients, and it's pretty important that you do own that, even if they are claiming it as proprietary information because they're building it out. in the end of the day, you don't want to walk away with having no business insights from everything you've run, regardless of how good or bad the performance was while you were with an agency.
Awesome, man. Holy cow, you guys, this is great. I'm super excited about this dialogue that we're having. So, Nicki, do you have any thoughts on, like you mentioned maximum number of accounts and that type of thing. So where does economy of scale fit in here with an agency, and what are your thoughts on some ranges of accounts that our listeners should think about in terms of how many accounts should people be managing, and if you see a number exceed that ratio per account manager, and maybe you can talk about the structure as well, junior account managers versus senior account managers versus maybe the biz dev person that you're talking to. What are your thoughts on what people should think about when they're talking to agencies that have multiple layers and account managers and have lots of clients?
Well, I think the question that goes hand in hand with that is what kind of budgets their clients have. So if you're working with an account manager who has budgets that are slightly lower, it would make more sense if they have more accounts and they don't demand as much time. When you're getting into, it depends on how much revenue they're managing, but obviously as they get higher up in budget, those clients are going to require more time. And although it might be cool that they're managing X amount of dollars, the reality is that they could be spread pretty thin. And I think from asking that question alone, a lot of people are caught off guard with it. It holds the company accountable for how they're treating their employees and what their team would actually look like. And I think one thing I've seen a client do recently, or prospect, was actually ask the people who they were meeting with to be signed on as their team in their contract. And I think that's incredibly important, because what agencies often do, I don't want to throw every agency under the bus because there are some really great ones out there that don't do this, but there are some agencies that'll send their top dogs. I mean, every company would do this, send the top dogs to go meet with the people. And then that's not the team they actually receive in the end of the day. So I think it's just about building that trust and rapport and really understanding who you're going to be working with every day and what their day-to-day looks like too.
Awesome. Agreed 100% on everything that you said. Look, we've got about 60 seconds left here before our webinar ends. I want to give each of the three of you just a few seconds to mention if there's any contact info you want to give out. We've got your websites and logos here on the slides. So those that are on the call, if you're interested in connecting with any of these three individuals, certainly I encourage you to do so. Like I said, all three people on this call we've worked with in various capacities at Guten. I think that having them on here, not only to get their expertise, we also are conveying that these are people that we trust, and they're great people, as you can tell, to start with the paid world and figure out how to navigate it and get going with it. So just to let everyone get a chance here, Chris, I'll start with you, and then we'll move our way with Caesar, and then to Nicki. Any last thoughts and any information you want to provide users on contact info or anything like that for follow-up?
I'll just leave the promotion. It's it's Chris at Clixo Search. If you have any questions at all, hopefully I'd be able to answer them. And I just want to say that there's so much around paid online advertising we could talk about. And so, an hour seems like it flies by. And maybe we'd have the opportunity to do some more of this again. But Chris at clixosearch.com. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Caesar, go ahead.
And I'd like to echo those comments that there's only so much you can cover in an hour, and even trying to formulate answers to a lot of the questions that came up is, you just know you're missing a lot. So if there's anything anyone has any follow-ups on, I'd be happy to help. This is a knowledge sharing community, so feel free to reach out at Caesar at goinflow.com.
Fantastic. Go ahead, Nicki. Your show.
Yeah, I wish my mother had given me an easier name, but my first full name is Nicolette, NICOLETTE @m@milestoneinternet.com, and I'm also happy to answer any questions. I'm also on Twitter, where I normally just yell at Google. So if you have any questions there, that's an easy way to find me too.
Nicki, what's your Twitter hashtag, or excuse me, your handle?
Nicki C. Martinez.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you very much to our panelists. I know we didn't get to everybody's question. There were some other questions that kind of got further into the weeds. Like I said, hopefully you have some resources to go ask those questions and follow up. We'd love to get your feedback, so we'll be sending out a poll to everyone, asking you what you thought about the dialogue here, and if there's other topics we could delve into. Certainly love to do that. We'd love to do this again. I actually had a blast today and learned a ton of stuff, from our panelists. So, thank you to all three of you for your time. We really appreciate it. We know that as a consultancy, time is how you make money. So that's not to say that we are undervaluing that in any way, shape, or form. So again, thank you for your time. We appreciate everyone who's attending today. We hope you learned a ton, and look forward to seeing you again here on a webinar in the next couple of weeks. So talk to you all then. Have a great day, everybody, and thank you again.